Hi, everyone. Welcome to our July Zoomers to Boomers Roundtable. My name is Serena. I also go by Ren, and I'll be your facilitator for today. Casey is not facilitating this roundtable in the interest of highlighting marginalized voices during today's discussion. I'd like to first thank everyone participating and watching. As you may know, Z2B is an intergenerational roundtable discussion which aims to represent multiple perspectives. We have a monthly roundtable on various topics, and you can apply to join a future discussion if you're interested. The link will be in the live stream chat. Today's discussion is centered around Raven Corps' Operation Mind Over Milk, which focuses on the unjust practice of dairy being forced onto students' plates at schools across America. So here's some information about that. 35 million gallons of milk were wasted in 2019 alone. Students must provide a doctor's note to access plant-based milks. 70% of students who receive their lunch through the USDA's National Lunch Program are people of color who are more likely to be lactose intolerant or lactose normal. Who can help this operation? Ages 15 to 22 can join as Ravens. Older folks can still support our youth advocacy. You can find out more through our link tree in the chat. Now it's time to get into today's roundtable. From the impacts factory farms have on their workers to the way the food system affects consumers and surrounding communities, this roundtable will focus on the various ways in which dairy farming shapes the lives of individuals and communities. We plan to tackle topics of racism, colonization, sexism, labor, and more in this human-focused roundtable. Our last roundtable focused on the impact of dairy farming on animals, so check that out on our YouTube channel if you're interested. Now we'll get into introductions. So I'll ask our panel to provide your name, pronouns, age or generation, location, title or organization, and your favorite plant-based milk. And I'll have that in the chat in a moment. So let me just get everyone here. All right, and anyone can go first, raise your hand or just start talking.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kennedy Little. My pronouns are she, her. I am from Lexington, Kentucky, and I am with the FFAC, Factory Farming Awareness Coalition. I'm also with the Farm Transition Academy, as well as the Youth Sterling Committee for Healthy Future Kids Act. I am also very happy to be here. I'm so happy to hear all these amazing voices. And my favorite plant-based milk would probably have to be oat milk. It's delicious.
Yvette, you can go ahead.
Hi, I'm Yvette Baker. I use she, her pronouns. Hi. I'm in Los Angeles, California. I am a geriatric millennial, and I am with Liberation 360, as well as with myself, an activist. And my favorite milk would be hemp milk. But if I'm going to be ambitious and make my own milk, you got to try this concoction. It's macadamia, cashew, and coconut with a coconut water base. You got to get on it.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. I will be trying that definitely. Isabel, you can go ahead.
Hi, my name is Isabel. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a 20-year-old Gen Zer. And I'm in LA, and I'm a Raven, and I'm a fellow environmental activist. And my favorite plant-based milk is soy milk.
Thank you. All right, Christopher, go ahead.
I am Christopher Sebastian. My pronouns are he, him. I'm 44 years old. I am in the Czech Republic, although I'm from the USA. Also known as Turtle Island. And my favorite plant-based milk would probably be oat, followed closely by the classic soy milk. But Yvette, I am scared of you. She just put this milk together and it sounds magical and mystical. She got macadamias and cashews and coconut water. I'm not that ambitious, but like I really want you to make it for me. So
Thank you for sharing. Ev, you can go ahead.
Hi, everybody. It's so cool to meet you guys. So my name is Yev. My pronouns are they, them. I'm 21. I'm Gen Z. And I'm based out of Charleston in South Carolina. I'm currently a student activist with the Factory Farming Awareness Coalition with Kennedy. And my favorite plant-based milk, there's so many pieces, I have to remember each one. Out of like just store-bought, I usually mix almond and like oat. But at home, I like to do a mix of like cashew, almond, and oat all together. But I've never even considered macadamia. That is so cool. It would add such a fun touch.
All right, next, Lauren can go ahead. And if you've already spoken, you can put down your hands.
I'm Lauren Ornelas. My pronouns are she, her, and I am in San Jose, which is the homeland of the Tamian Nation. I am Generation X. I'm 52, and it's really cool that I'm Generation X because that's one of my favorite bands. So if you have not heard of Generation X, pretty badass. Sorry if I just cussed. I cuss a lot. And I'm the founder of Food Empowerment Project. My favorite plant-based milk is oat milk, and I'm kind of wondering why it took us this long to get to the oat milk because I've been waiting for it for a long time.
That is a very fair point. All right, I've got like 2 left, I believe. Laura and Frankie, whoever of you wants to go first, go ahead.
I can go. Sorry. So my name's Frankie Belden. I use she, her, or they, them pronouns, either one. I'm from Generation Z. I'm in Richfield, Connecticut, and I am with Farm Sanctuary's Youth Leadership Council along with Casey, and I also do a lot of activism on my own, and I'm also going into junior year in high school, and my favorite plant-based milk is probably oat.
Awesome. And now, Laura, you can go ahead.
Hi, so my name is Laura. I also use she, her pronouns. And I am the Institute for Critical Animal Studies Director of Regions and Total Liberation. And I also am the co-founder of Plant the Land, which is a vegan food justice and community projects team in Gaza. Christopher Sebastian, I see you applauding. Thank you so much for your support of Plant the Land. I am also the program chair for an organization called Promoting Enduring Peace, which is actually a peace and ecology organization. So they look at issues of climate justice and anti-war, anti-imperialism. Their slogan, which I love, is peace on earth, peace with earth. I think that kind of encapsulates what they do. So those are some of my affiliations, and let's see, I'm on unceded Wangunk territory in what is now known as Connecticut, in the occupied Turtle Island, aka the United States. And let's see, my favorite plant-based milk, and also my generation. So I actually really identify as a Zennial, which is on that border between Gen X and Millennial. And it was funny because as I was listening to everyone else speak, I was thinking, yeah, that's a border region. And then again, borders are constructs and generations are constructs, because it's all, marketing kind of categories anyways. So, I kind of feel like I have aspects of both of those generations and they kind of inform my whole worldview. And let's see, my favorite plant-based milk. Yeah, I also love oat milk, but it has to be extra creamy. I do not like the regular oat milk, and macadamia milk sounds amazing, but then again, I couldn't bear to not eat the nuts as they are if I had macadamia nuts. So I probably will never make macadamia milk.
Thank you so much for sharing. Okay, next up, we will get into the questions. Okay, so I've got a question for you all. Given that people of color are more likely to be lactose normal or lactose intolerant than their white counterparts, how is mandatory milk at schools linked to racism? How is it linked to other social justice issues? And I will put that in the chat for you all, of course. So anyone can either speak up or raise your hand and I will call on you, or you just start talking. But yeah, take your time. And there's a question for you. All right, Christopher, go ahead.
I just wanted to jump into the discussion because I didn't want it to be quiet for a long time. And then Lauren raised her hand right after me. So I think she's going to have a better answer than I will. So I want her to go first.
No, I always feel, first of all, I feel like Black people should go first and younger people should go first. And then I'm like, but of course I got something to say. Everybody knows who I am. I got something to say about this. But I'm like, well, I guess I should go. Y'all get to hear the inner thoughts that I have.
Right.
I would say, first of all, I want to thank you all for recognizing the term lactose normal and the fact that lactose intolerant implies inherently there's something wrong with Black, brown, and indigenous people who can't digest the milk of another species. So thank you very much for that. I guess that to me, how it's linked to racism is because the powers that be never want us to get ahead, right? They want to see us fail. They want to blame us for dropout rates. They want to blame us for low education scores without taking any responsibility for this country's inherent racism and that it's built into it, right? So when you have children only having the ability to consume cow's milk means that they are going to be not feeling good at school. It means that if they talk about not wanting to drink it, they may be made fun of. You have all these things going on. So you have the children who are going to be at school not feeling good. So therefore they're not doing as well. They're not studying as well. So that inherently builds into a system where you have students who aren't going to do very well. And again, my opinion is that this is built into the system. It's there to profit, right? They want these corporations to profit, right? That's why they're in this school lunch program. But it's not as if anybody's going to say, hey, don't forget, it's not really good for everybody. They don't care. If it wasn't good for the white kids, maybe they would take notice. So I think that it's inherently built in. I mean, everything in this country is racist. So there's very few things in this country that isn't going to have some type of racist component to it, because we all know, right? Everybody who's on here knows that it was built off the backs of Black people, stolen from brown people. So I think that no matter what it is, and it's linked to other social justice issues just because of it impacts education. And then you go into all the other things that impact somebody's ability to find a good job. That means they're going to be working in industries that are going to pay them less. So it's this chain reaction that happens just simply based on something like the fact that a product that they're going to be either forced to consume is going to make them sick, or that they're going to not consume it and possibly feel ostracized.
Thank you so much. That was so insightful. Thank you. Christopher, did you still have something you wanted to share?
Not really. Lauren said everything. It's true. Also, I just want to be mindful of time and and keep the questions coming in. But honestly, yeah, the main thing for me is that it generalizes the experiences of white and white presenting people. Because of course, if you are a person who's lactose normal, then you aren't going to have the same or experience the same health outcomes as as people who are able to consume lactose, which is what we really should be pathologizing. And yeah, the fact that it's in schools has an impact on children because if they are not consuming milk, which again, let's just take a moment to talk about how weird is it? I don't know how things are in schools now. I imagine not much different, but this is the primary beverage that's available to you. They're not even giving you a bottle of water. They just slap this carton of milk on your lunch tray, and we just went with it. And it's this is just, I guess, the thing that we're supposed to be drinking, not even a Diet Coke or something. And and this is just that's it. And if you got real snaztastic, you got a little strawberry or chocolate milk, but always milk. and we weren't supposed to question that. I'm like, this is like, even if you are a milk drinking person, that's gotta be weird. That's gotta be weird that like we're just sitting here with these cartons of milk, just guzzling it down. Like this is just perfectly normal thing to be doing. And this is the only thing that we're drinking here, absent of anything else. Perhaps if we pay for it. But like, yeah, like it's completely wild. It's thick, it's sitting on your stomach, even if you like the stuff. It's just like that's just wild to me. So get it out of the schools, I say.
Thank you for contributing. Yes, Kennedy.
Those are both such phenomenal points. And I would just like to add that currently in the US, there are more Starbucks, more Subways than there are more cafeterias than there are Starbucks and Subways here within the United States. And to just think that there are not enough accommodations for students of color or just for students in general within these classrooms, within these cafeterias, it truly is mind-boggling. When I can remember going into my cafeteria, my public school cafeteria in elementary school, high school, and middle school, and sitting down and realizing that there were not options for me, it was truly staggering. And it truly is something that needs to be changed. And I mean, there's over 7 billion school meals served every single year. And I feel like when students are not able to get the necessities that they need, especially if it is pushing towards more climate friendly alternatives, then it really is just another layer of environmental injustice and environmental racism, because it shows that, hey, if you don't have a doctor's note, if you don't have your parent's signature, then your opinion and your health is not valid. And these are just such important issues that we need to start tackling very soon, in which we are.
Thank you. Oh, Lauren, yes.
Sorry, I just have one more thing to add. One is that the fact that this milk is only what's available also erases our cultures, right? Because a lot of people have been drinking plant-based milks for a long time. And yet we act as if the only milk that's there is cow's milk, where people have been drinking coconut milk for a long time, soy milk, all these different types of milk. So when we argue about that, we also argue that we're ignoring and erasing other people's cultures when we only offer them the European type milk.
Definitely. Yeah, Frankie.
Sorry, I'm not sure how to raise my hand virtually. So I just also wanted to add that a lot of schools hide behind the fact that like milk is supposed to be good for kids. It has calcium, it like provides this essential mineral. And meanwhile, they don't offer like anything else that has calcium. It's just milk. So for kids who are lactose normal and they can't consume this milk, they're being deprived of this essential nutrient that they aren't consuming. And a lot of people of color don't have as much calcium as white people have because they're lactose normal. And so these kids are being deprived of this nutrient that they need to grow because they only get one source of it, which makes them sick.
Yeah, those are great points. Thank you for sharing. Oh my goodness, so many hands. Okay. In the order that I see them, Evan can go first, then Yvette, and I saw someone else, but I missed it. Okay, but we'll come back to you. I'll find you. But go ahead. Yeah.
I just think it's such an accessibility problem. Like the fact that you need to get a doctor's note in order to access an alternative type of milk when a massive portion of the population needs that. Like it's a massive accessibility issue. I mean, that requires even being able to go to a doctor's office, afford that just for the sake of a doctor's note. I know for me, it's like that was a barrier. I'm white presenting, but I'm also lactose normal. And like that was definitely a barrier for me, like being uninsured as a child, like going to the doctor over something ridiculous like that just to access plant-based milk options is not really a thing. So it creates an unnecessary problem over such a simple thing that we could fix easily by just providing other options.
Right, yeah, thank you for sharing. Yvette, did you have something to add?
Yes, in relation to how it is linked to other social justice issues, per your question, I'm wondering more so if this if resolving this, to everyone's point about accessibility and whatnot, and about how it's not considered, it's a non-issue essentially. I wonder if it follows the same paradigm where we need more of a white, epidemic. This affects Black and brown kids, but I'm just wondering if, when we wait until it is a white issue, then it becomes an issue, a broader issue that we can take seriously. So I feel like that's how it's, in my eyes, very linked, because this is what we do, whether it's this or some kind of drug addiction or something. It's like that is viewed as a very separate, outside, deviant issue. But when white people, white kids, whomever get involved, then we have a crisis. We have a mental health crisis or whatever it is. Then it becomes taken seriously at that point. So I feel like this is following suit.
Yeah, definitely. Laura, go ahead.
Yeah, that's such an interesting point, Yvette, that you brought up. And actually, as I was doing the research for this talk, I had heard a while back about a community in Wisconsin, Casco, Wisconsin, where they have a lot of water pollution from the dairy industry, and that is causing very high rates of blue baby syndrome, high, infant deaths, and all kinds of really serious health issues. There's bacteria in the water, and people are developing kidney disease, and they're developing all kinds of really serious illnesses. And so I had heard about this a while ago. Yeah, blue baby syndrome. And I looked it up again tonight because I wanted to know, what was the racial component. And the town was 97.55% white. So it was not an environmental racism issue, but it was an environmental classism issue, obviously. We know that these people are obviously going to be very, very poor if they're living in a place like that. And they've been fighting for 10 years to try to actually press charges against the Wisconsin environmental regulation department, saying, well, you didn't protect us from this, So it's interesting because even though it's not a racism issue, it's still not getting the exposure because it's a poverty issue. But that being said, obviously, I strongly agree that, for people of color, it's much, much more common, that they're going to be suffering with these things and that they're not going to get the attention and the justice. So the other thing I wanted to say was, a couple of things. First of all, about the dairy in the schools. And one of the big issues that dairy creates as a health issue is asthma and bronchial problems. And what's interesting about that, and actually, that's been something that I've had a lot of in my family, because even though we are white, we are Jewish, and actually there's very, very high rates of lactose intolerance in that population as well. And so, there's been like a big asthma issue that is caused by consuming dairy, that, if you stop consuming dairy, you're going to breathe better, most likely. But what's interesting about that is that the dairy industry is also causing breathing issues on the other end, which is air pollution. And animal agriculture in general causes 17,900 deaths in the US per year alone, just from air pollution, and globally, many, many more. So there's kind of this 1-2 punch of, pollution in the air causing breathing problems. And then, of course, breathing problems caused from consuming dairy because it causes you to produce mucus. And of course, you also have a lot of kids that are low income, that are communities of color, that are in communities where there's bad air quality, more generally, areas where there are factories located, incinerators located, inner city communities where there's bad air quality. And then on top of that, you're consuming dairy, which is causing even more breathing problems. And the last thing I wanted to say was that actually the white nationalist movement in this country has become so aware of this linkage between dairy and racism that they have actually claimed dairy as their drink that represents them. And they, kind of proudly display this idea that consuming the ability to consume dairy products, so really lactose abnormality, indicates that Europeans are genetically superior. So, I mean, this tells you the level to which that linkage between dairy and racism really, exists.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing all of those points. Isabel, go ahead.
So like following on what Laura said, I think it's just crazy that this stuff is put into our education, and we're given advertisements like our whole lives that dairy is needed into our food pyramid. And so for a long time, I didn't know why I had these problems. So I finally understood in my high school years that it was dairy that was giving me all these problems. And yeah, it's just mind-boggling.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing. Does anybody have anything else you'd like to add before we move on? All right, then I will pull up the next question. Oh, I'll give you a couple more seconds though. Okay. How is this country's history of colonization related to dairy consumption and the dairy industry in general? I will put that in the comments or the chat. See, we've already got some hands. I don't know which ones to go with first. Oh my God, that's a lot of hands. Okay, I think I saw Christopher's first, so you can go ahead.
I'll be brief. There is actually a book that was written in, I believe, 2018 or 2019 that I reference a lot, and it's by Joshua Sprecht, S-P-R-E-C-T. It's called Red Meat Republic, and it actually talks about the history of colonization in the United States as through, like, as part of a larger project of cattle ranching, which is fascinating for me because when we think about the expansion of of European settlers, and AKA colonizers in the United States, it wasn't just expansion for expansion's sake. I mean, it was, but this was largely driven by the expansion of the cattle ranching industry. So it's deeply woven into the fabric of of colonizing the United States in the 1800s. But then when you fast forward into the into the 1900s and into into the 20th century, I don't recall how old everybody is. Some of y'all might be old, but are y'all government cheese old? I'm government cheese old. I'm government cheese old. If you all young people don't know about government cheese, it is a huge part of the 1970s and 1980s. And what happened was in the 1970s, there during another era of massive inflation, which we're experiencing right now, food prices were getting out of control. There was a massive $2 billion subsidy that was given primarily to dairy farmers. And as a result of that, dairy farmers were flush with cash in a time when many US American people were extremely poor. And there was this massive surplus of milk. And we tend to talk about milk an awful lot in isolation without also talking about other dairy products, cheese being one of those products. There were these huge blocks, 5-pound blocks of what people colloquially called government cheese that were passed out to welfare recipients or people who were receiving social benefits in the United States. And so this was this like source of humiliation in some communities and shame. And there were articles that were even written about it. One of them that I think was entitled "The Tyranny and Comfort of Government Cheese," that talks about how it proliferated throughout primarily Black and Brown communities and actually became a staple of our culture. This became culturally iconic for us in Black and Brown cultures as a sign of Black struggle. It has been adopted into music lyrics, especially in hip hop. And and these are the ways that the history of colonization and dairy consumption and the dairy industry, have been woven into the fabric of US American society. And very insidiously so, because we don't even realize that it's happening. It's just because we don't talk about government cheese now, it came or it left as quickly as it came. And so with the 1990s, when the food situation in the United States started to shift dramatically again, those cultural staples started to go away. But the memory of it, that remains. And the impact that it has had on our communities also remains. I was 4 in the 1980s, and I still remember what it tasted like and what it looked like, and what it meant for our family to actually participate in the program that gave it to us. There's this very odd mixture of sort of Velveeta cheddar and American cheese, and this block that you could almost make buildings with, and it was absolutely wild. So there are so many different unspoken ways in which we experience the dairy industry in our everyday lives without even really thinking about it or thinking about the harm that it's caused and how pervasive it has been and still is to this day.
Thank you for sharing that. It was really insightful. All right, let's go for Frankie.
Hi. So adding on to that, I did not know about government cheese, but that was very informative. So I did some research about the history of colonization in the US, and I learned online that Columbus brought the first cows to the United States in 1493 during his second journey to the New World. And it spread very quickly as Columbus came and more settlers and colonizers came and sort of took over. The idea of dairy and cattle, it just kind of spread around and sort of transforming the US in making it more suitable for Europeans, because they had this huge superiority complex that if they did not consume the food they were used to in their home continent, then they would either die or become like the native people, the indigenous people of America, Turtle Island. And so in this way, the US was kind of transformed into this place where it was all cattle, dairy, and the European culture kind of took over.
Thank you for sharing. Let's go for Lauren.
Well, Frankie, that's exactly from my organization's website. So you took care of me retelling that a bit. But yeah, we have a page on our website on colonization. And yes, we talk about how Columbus brought the cows over on the second voyage. And I think what's important about that is, someone like me, I'm Hispanics, which means I'm, Mexican and I'm indigenous. I'm very proud of my indigenous ancestry. And so basically, that is how you understand why some of us are lactose normal, because it was not inherent for our ancestors to be consuming the cows that they were bringing over from Europe. It wasn't what my indigenous ancestors were eating, right? So it makes sense that over time, we don't do well with cow's milk. To me, it's a legacy of colonization. So colonization is in existence still just inherently by us having milk in this country. So yeah, he brought them over, felt like, that if they didn't eat their foods, then they would become savages, is basically what Columbus felt like and what the Europeans felt like. And what happened there is it completely transformed the eating habits of the people, of my indigenous ancestors, because of them wanting to bring things like flour over instead of corn. So it really changed not only the way that we lived then, it changed the way we live now. But yeah, Frankie, you summed it up fine, but that is exactly what I was going to say as part of our research. We talked about that basically on the second voyage, that was it. So it really makes you look at other things when you realize like how long it has been since this legacy of colonization has been placed upon us, at least my ancestors.
Thank you. Next we'll go with Isabel, and then Ev, and then Laura.
I was also gonna talk about the Colombian exchange, but following with that, with more cattle being brought into the Americas, that also brought deforestation. And so that deforestation also ruined whole communities and brought more diseases that indigenous people did not know of before the Europeans came. So with deforestation, that ruins economic capabilities that people had, and their whole livelihoods were taken away from them. And yeah, it's just like angry.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing. Ev, you can go ahead.
Yeah, just kind of going off of what everybody said a little bit, like the dairy industry's ties to colonization are just so deep and they're so interwoven. Everybody already mentioned, the livestock that were brought over. I knew that a bit ago, but I didn't know, this was something I learned a little bit more recently, was I learned this from a friend taking a kind of anthropology of plants class. And they told me about how the majority of the grass in the United States, the grass species, are invasive species. They were also brought over in the process of bringing over animals and livestock, quote unquote, into the country, because basically the grass species here, they were felt to be like inferior for the animals and all these things. So they decided to bring over their own grass as well. And I just think that like just the layers of kind of the ousting of indigenous plants and animals and all of these things, and having them replaced by European alternatives that are invasive and that were ultimately harmful to a lot of the indigenous species. Like those new species of grass were harmful to a lot of the indigenous species of animals. And even today, we kind of see a huge history of this. So often local indigenous plants are labeled, and like edible plants that we could be using that could be something super valuable, are often labeled as weeds. And we favor them for plants that have a massive environmental impact, aren't local, or hurting our biodiversity. I just feel there's so many layers, and it just stems so far.
Yeah, thank you for contributing. Laura, you can go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously this is a massive connection. And a lot of people have articulated that so well so far. But I do want to just point out a few additional things. First of all, I just always have to point this out because it's literally staring us in the face in the phrase cowboys and Indians, quote unquote, right? I mean, that is the central colonial conflict of what is now called the Americas, right there, cowboys and quote unquote Indians. So, I mean, you see it right in that phrase that it's the cow culture, it's the exploitation of cows through ranching and farming that literally was the biggest driver of taking over all that land in this part of the world. And that of course is because it takes up massive amounts of land to, number one, raise animals in general. People forget that when you are consuming the body parts or the bodily fluids of an animal, they have to eat and drink their whole lives up until that point, which means that you're using a lot of land. You constantly need to be moving, the pasture gets overgrazed, and then you have to move to another area. And so because of this, it's been this like massive driver of war and colonialism going all the way back to the Neolithic era, even. Even going back to the herder societies of that time, you would have them always invading the planter societies and taking over their land and using it for pasture and water. So, I mean, this has been something that goes way, way, way back. And that has been a massive driver of colonialism all along.
I hear you. Thank you for sharing. Kennedy, go ahead.
I would just like to add that here in the US, Asian Americans, African Americans, and Indigenous people have over a 50% rate of being lactose normal. So that alone shows that just those epigenetics of not being able to process dairy, it goes so far back. When I think about the colonization by the Spaniards in the Mesoamericas, or the colonization by the Europeans here in the New World, it just shows how barbaric the colonization was. Colonization is really not something like many young people might think it is, learning from their public schools. Many public schools, eyewitnesses really try to paint it as a very picturesque step-by-step process, which it truly just is not. And I feel that when people buy into the dairy industry, when we're buying even not plant-based products, but animal-based products like eggs and chicken and all these dairy consumed products, it truly is giving weight and allowing the colonization to carry on. Many people who are in control of these organizations and of these industries are white men in power. And they didn't just get there overnight. It was truly years and centuries of leading up to that point where they have always been in power. So it's really just such an interconnected issue when we think about how just colonization of people who were subjugated and who were taking power over them, how that still leads into our grocery stores and into what we buy into. Colonization is still so ever so present, and it truly takes people willing to change their lifestyles to make a change within that industry.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing. Yvette, go ahead.
Yes, no, that was great, Kennedy. And much to that point, I was going to say, our consumption as a society carries on through a colonized mind. The country, this country was founded in farming. The colonizer became the farmer, became the slave owner, and back to the farmer. But along the way, along this road, I think culturally, the dairy farmer, above other animal industrial farmers, became sort of the epitome persona of what it is to be Americanized. And if you do any activism online, you may relate that if you in any way present in any way against dairy or anti-dairy, it seems to hit in a harder place. And I think that culturally we've come here to personify this person as specifically, of course, a family-oriented, white, God-fearing, cishet male on his knees in his overalls underneath a cow. But that representation is really powerful. And I think it's defined a lot for people as what it means to be American and hardworking. And I think that carries with a large portion of society. So I feel like in a way that manifests as feeling like a duty to many Americans to uphold this. And just a very quick anecdote, I was working for a plant-based milk and non-dairy dairy company, let's say. And in my experience promoting these non-dairy products to the public, a lot of the feedback I would get, the resistance that I would get, people would tell me that I was being unpatriotic in my pursuit of promoting these products and essentially going against the American dairy farmer. So I found that very interesting, and of course in line with this image that I strongly feel people have in their heads and in their minds. Yeah.
All right. Thank you for sharing, Yvette.
Mm-hmm.
I see we've got some final thoughts. We can get to those. Please make them quick. We got to move on to the next question, but go off. Laura.
Thanks. So I realized that I didn't finish in my earlier part because I wanted to talk about actually colonialism and imperialism that's going on today with this issue. So I really, there's been a lot of news lately about these grain shortages and how there are 50 million people at risk of or even already experiencing famine at the moment. And then you've got like another 300 million that are at risk, that are not quite as famine, close to famine, but that are at risk of that. And or food insecurity more generally. And something that is not being spoken about is that 40% of all of the world's grain is being used for quote unquote livestock animal feed. So this is something that, but I also think that we need to ask why so many people have no access to food in the first place. Because of course, if you look at like the way that people traditionally accessed food, they accessed it through producing it off of the land that they were living on. And so again, we have this massive industry of animal agriculture is the biggest land user in the world right now. So you have about 45% of the world's land, inhabitable land, is used for agriculture, and of that, 80% is used for animal agriculture. So again, this is a massive issue even today of people not having access to land because of the continued usage of this industry. And then I also wanted to mention a very specific incident of colonialism that's going on related to dairy right now, which is the Saudi-backed war in Yemen. So Saudi Arabia is being armed by the United States, and they are bombing Yemen, and they are specifically targeting and taking over agricultural lands in Yemen, which has caused one of the worst famines in the world. The United Nations actually said it was arguably the biggest human rights crisis since the Holocaust. And one of the big reasons why is because the Saudi Arabian dairy industry, they can't grow the hay and the alfalfa in Saudi Arabia to produce for the dairy cows because they are experiencing droughts because of climate change. Now, of course, animal agriculture is also one of the biggest drivers of climate change. So it's causing problems in that area too. But because of that, they are seizing Yemen's lands and Yemen's water supply so that they can grow feed crops for the dairy cows in Saudi Arabia to then export that dairy for profit. So here we have a very active current example of the dairy industry being a huge driver of colonialism in the world right now.
I hear you. Thank you for sharing all that. In the interest of time, I'm going to ask that we move on. For those of you who did have something extra you wanted to share, you can write those down or keep them in your head, and you can talk about those when I ask for your final thoughts later. So now we'll move on to the next question. All right, so our next question is, how is worker mistreatment on dairy farms linked to other social justice issues? So I will put that in the chat for you. Laura, do you have your hand up for the next question? Laura, do you have your hand up for the next question? No? Okay. All right, then anybody can go. Just raise your hand or start talking. And the question is in the chat, yes. Okay. All right, Lauren.
Well, as somebody who's investigated factory farms and personally has investigated where the cows are kept in confinement in both large scale industrial farms as well as smaller farms, I think it's always important that we don't skip over what the animals are going through, the non-human animals are going through as well. First and foremost is, the fact that they're separated from the mothers, that the babies cry mercilessly for their mothers. And I think that it's important to acknowledge that because that does impact the workers. It impacts the workers on a psychological level as they're working, but it also impacts important to acknowledge the toll it takes on slaughterhouse workers as well. The mistreatment again, my organization, we're a vegan organization. So we want to be careful not to just talk about the mistreatment of workers in animal agriculture, but to recognize as vegans that our food is not exactly cruelty-free based on the fact of how farm workers are treated for our produce. And they're treated very similar. So you have workers many of whom are undocumented, who, if they decide to speak out about mistreatment or abuse, whether it be to each other or non-human animals, they're threatened with deportation and threatened with other forms of violence. They suffer from the respiratory issues. Sure, many of you have seen how a lot of workers in these facilities, we call them just animal farms, because it really doesn't matter if they're large or small, they do the same things inherently to non-human animals and the workers. But how many of these workers die in what are known as manure pits. They like to call them manure lagoons, but they're manure pits. How a lot of these workers are overcome by the fumes and fallen and die horrific deaths in these manure pits. But they have many health problems. They don't get paid well. It's unless you've done these investigations, it's really hard to understand how bad these facilities smell. Isabel, maybe you're familiar driving down the 5 or the 99 and smelling it here in Central California, where we have some of the highest rates of asthma in the country, predominantly Latinx community members living in this. And I guess that leads to another thing is the vast majority of people working in the dairy industry, at least in the largest dairy producing state, which is California, are Latinx. So you have a form of environmental racism there as well. So it's goes on to so many. We have worker mistreatment issues. We have emotional, psychological issues. You have fence line communities who are impacted. We have communities in California who we're going to be delivering school supplies to for the children of farm workers tomorrow, who basically only can drink bottled water because our water is so contaminated by the dairy industry that they have been drinking only bottled water for 10 plus years in some communities, and nobody's doing anything to change it. So the worker mistreatment, it goes beyond when they clock in and clock out. It goes on their homes, their kids suffer from when they go to school. So the mistreatment and the injustice that takes place against them is violence, threat of freedom, threat of expression, the ability for them not to speak out for themselves and each other. So I think those are just some of them off the top of my head.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing those thoughts. All right, Isabel, go ahead.
I think it's also important to understand that farm workers do not report injuries on the job because out of fear of being fired or blamed of hurting those animals. And if they are fired, they are taken off the property that they're living on, and they often bring their families with them to those properties, and once they're fired, they're just kicked out and another family moves in without anybody telling them.
Okay, thank you for sharing. Ev, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm gonna echo some of the things people have said, but yeah, just going off of it, these industries, they're kind of built entirely on exploiting the people that work for them, both through the use of immigrant and undocumented immigrant labor, as well as through the use of contract labor from prisons. Through the use of hiring through both of these populations, they're able to not only pay the people that work for them a lot less, but they also have far less accountability because these people often do not have the power to pursue legal action. And on top of it, the few that do, these industries have had a history of going after people that have tried to speak up for themselves, to fight for their legal rights. There's countless examples, articles of especially undocumented undocumented and immigrant workers who tried to pursue different forms of legal action, and just within a short period of anything kind of actually getting traction, there's countless instances of these industries reporting those workers to immigration services and getting them deported and getting them into trouble. So it's beyond just like a fear that someone's going to do something. Like there's literal history of this industry doing that regularly and hurting workers and preventing them from taking action.
Thank you for sharing. Does anyone else have something to add to that or their own thoughts? I do have some questions relating that I could point to, but I see Laura has raised her hand. Go ahead.
So I just wanted to share something that I came across before we started, which shocked me, which is that apparently animal agriculture has the highest rate of human trafficking of any industry except the sex industry. So it ranks number 2 after the sex trade in terms of human trafficking. And I do think it's significant to point out that that is because of the exploitation of bodies in both cases. People do not want to work exploiting bodies, and they are forced to, which of course has to do with the psychological impact of that that Lauren was talking about, in addition to the physical danger aspect. The dairy industry is one of the most dangerous industries. And yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. More questions. Wait, who's that? Oh, F. Yes, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, going off that, just the ties with human trafficking just also runs so deep. Even just looking at the fishing industry, especially the use of labor from individuals who have been human trafficked on these ships. A lot of that fishing, by the way, is being done specifically for U.S. consumers. But yeah, there's extremely high rates in fishing industries all over Asia. And I think that was the end of my thought. But yeah.
Well, thank you. All right. Anyone else have anything to add? Laura, did you have your hand up? All right. Okay, well, I suppose we can move on to the next question now. Okay, then that we shall. Okay, so how is factory farming linked to sexism? I will put that in the chat for you. Anyone can go ahead. Isabel, go ahead.
Hi, so growing up in a Latino family, I know that with the males in my family that you have to eat meat in order to be manly, and doing that makes them feel masculine, and it's appealing. So that's one of the major things about the industry that makes it sexist, and it's mostly appealing to masculine macho men and the machismo in the Latino community.
I hear you. Thank you for sharing. All right, let's go to Frankie.
Yeah, so adding on to that, like culturally in the not just in the United States, but pretty much in the whole entire world, women have always been treated as less than men, and in the past, they have been kind of, just like objectified, just turned into like objects for men to use to be like wives, mothers. They're just kind of something that a husband or a father like owns, just, and that's similar to how animals are treated today and throughout history, as just sort of just an object, something not sentient that can just be used for other people's benefit. So you can see the similarities between these two social justice issues. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. Let's go to Kennedy.
So to kind of answer this question, I think that I have to like refer back to an anecdote of me being around 10 years old and being downstairs in my family's living room and watching TV. And then all of a sudden a commercial came on, and it was a Hardee's commercial of a young woman who was barely dressed, and she had a hamburger in her hand trying to make it seem very sexy looking. And that alone kind of took me back for a second, because I was like, okay, well, what am I watching first of all? And what am I seeing? But little did I know that at that young age, I was seeing the very action of the objectification of a woman's body. And it didn't take until now, really recently, that I was starting to make the connections that the target audience was for men, and it was mainly for men because for some reason in our social system, women have a lot of attributes of, these motherly, all these different adjectives of motherly. She's more protective over children. She's more emotional, while men have these attributes of being tougher, harder. Someone mentioned macho man. And over time, that has become the target audience for many of these meat commercials. And it's really sickening, because that, of course, ties into other social issues that we have. And just seeing that very commercial, it really showed me that for many industries, the marketing tactic is to show that women are just as similar to animals. Take a thigh, take a neck, take an arm. Our bodies are merely just products. And it showed that this commodification of a woman's body is just so similarly to the negative commodification of an animal's body. So there are many, many similarities within how marketing tactics are used to draw people in. And just because it's on TV or just because you read it, of course, does not make it good.
Great. Thank you, Kennedy. Laura, you can go ahead.
Yeah, so I wanted to share a story that I think says a lot about this, with a woman who's a big animal rights activist today, but she actually was a slaughterhouse worker when she was a teenager. And she is also an immigrant from Mexico. And when she was working in the slaughterhouse, it was slaughtering chickens, her boss, his wife, would come to the facility sometimes, and she was always wearing, a lot of times sunglasses and stuff, and everybody kind of knew that he was beating her. And many years later, of course, as a teenager, she didn't realize this. Everybody was just kind of talking about, how awful that was. But many years later, she realized that the work, quote unquote, that was being done in that facility of killing those birds was linked to this man brutalizing his wife, because it was, again, violence against bodies and objectification of bodies. And she kind of made that connection, that there was a connection with domestic violence to that. And that is actually really backed up by research, because there was a research study, quite massive one, that looked at the community surrounding these slaughterhouses, and they found that the domestic violence rates were through the roof. And then they were concerned that people would try to frame this as, oh, that's because these communities are poor, and they're under stress, or even worse, oh, it's because it's immigrant communities, because immigrants are, of course, the ones who work at slaughterhouses, because people with citizenship that have other job opportunities don't want to. So, oh, it's their culture, right? So the racist, xenophobic argument. So they controlled for all of these different factors, and they said, no, all these different communities that don't have slaughterhouses, they don't have this problem in the same way, no matter how poor they are, or, what culture, or et cetera. It's very specific to slaughterhouses, because people are killing all day, men are killing all day. There is psychological trauma that happens from that, and they do unleash it. So there's a very strong connection between domestic violence and the violence that happens in these facilities. But the other thing that I wanted to mention as well is that when you have these undocumented workers in these facilities, and they are women, again, they don't have legal rights, they don't have protections. So, sexual harassment, rape, all of these things are rampant. And the bosses can do these things, and then they can silence the victims by threatening them with deportation. The victims have no legal rights to protect them because, they're undocumented, or they're prison labor, or et cetera. So, it's just like rampant connection there between the violence that is being done to the animals, the non-human animals, and the violence that is being done on that level as well. And the last thing I want to say about this is that you certainly do not need to be a woman to be pregnant. But if you are pregnant and you're working in one of these facilities, you're going to suffer even more, because you're going to be surrounded by the heat. You're going to be surrounded by the smells of, animals being slaughtered, blood, guts, etc. It's very easy to pass out. You can be injured, you can miscarry. You're not going to get bathroom breaks. There are actually workers that are wearing diapers because they have to go for so long, and they can't go to the bathroom. You're not going to have water breaks. So, if you're pregnant, this is all going to take a massive toll on you physically, in a way that, wouldn't be for someone who wasn't. So all of these are major connections to sexism.
Right. Thank you for sharing. It's really heavy, but very important to talk about. All right, Ev, go ahead.
Those were some hugely important connections. Thank you for sharing that. I was just going to add just something that strikes me about kind of these relationships between sexism, toxic masculinity, and the meat and dairy industries is just how pervasive it is on a global level too. With Factory Farming Awareness Coalition, we did kind of this activity where we were looking at those advertisements, much like what Kennedy was describing, advertisements in the media, and just kind of how the industry portrays women in that advertising. And it just, first of all, it struck me that I went online and all I did was search for meat ads or fast food ads. I didn't specify anything about sexism or anything else. And the amount of ads that just came out naturally that way, that were objectifying women and were so sexist, there's just the majority. That's just the majority of the ads they seem to produce. So that's something that I kind of took away with that. But also I personally was interested in looking kind of further. So I was looking up ads in kind of other countries too. And what I noticed was, like what Isabel said, of course, with Hispanic men and machismo and the meat connection, that's a huge one. But different forms of that exist across all these different cultures. In the United States, there's definitely a huge connection between men culture and like barbecuing, and there's just like men and meat are so intertwined just like in American culture. And then I was looking at European ads as well from so many different countries. And it was interesting to see that like the way that women were being objectified was different. Like the style of the ads was different, but the concepts were the same. The toxicity was the same. And it's just like, I don't know, just seeing all of that, it just really struck me just how wide it is and how it appears everywhere in kind of culturally specific forms.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing that. Let's go to Frankie and then Isabel, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add that not only is the animal agriculture industry sexist towards women, but it's also towards men, because men are sort of just expected to, eat a lot of meat, drink milk, eat animal products, because it just represents like their manliness or their ability to like have domination over another species. And a lot of times they are made fun of if they say go vegetarian, because I guess it's just not cool, especially for men, because they're supposed to be strong and everything. For example, like I know my dad has been a vegetarian for 30 years, and I've actually seen him in public, like kind of being ostracized like by his friends for being vegetarian. And I don't know if that's because like he's older or if he's a man, but he's like kind of made fun of by his friends for something that I've never really experienced in that way. And he just kind of laughs it off, but you can tell it kind of like, it's problematic.
Definitely. That's really heavy. Thank you for sharing. Okay, Isabel, go ahead.
So yeah, definitely the dairy industry, the meat industry revolves around toxic masculinity, and a lot of men feel that pressure to uphold that image, and they have to be that image to seem masculine, even though it's harmful to their health whenever they continue eating it in large amounts. And yeah.
Hey, all right. So with that, we're gonna go ahead and move on to the next question, which is, what are some of the ways that have not yet been addressed in which milk consumption adversely affects human health? I'll put that in the chat. Ooh, it happened immediately because I already had it queued. Okay. So who wants to go ahead? I see hands raised, but I don't know if those are left over from the last question. Are they? No? Okay. All right, then whoever wants to speak, you may. All right, Yvette.
I all of a sudden forgot how to do it on the computer. Like,
fine, it's fine.
I know. I mean, I was just gonna bring up the obvious one, I guess, is that it just even though sales, consumption and sales are on the decline, luckily, it's still the consumption upholds this industry. We can have a whole separate chat about subsidies and bailouts and insurances and the fact that the dairy industry is essentially fail-proof right now. But the fact of the matter is there are still bountiful dairy sales. They're not dead yet. And of course, this affects our health in all the ways mentioned, with all the pollution, all the land use, human health directly, just the consumption, the idea that this needs to be consumed, that it's part of our nutritional pyramid or the food plate or whatever rendition we have today for children in schools. But the fact that there are sales, that we uphold this industry in any way possible, and that we're not, I think, taking more action collectively and making sure that we are all on the same page. I mean, whether you're vegan, non-vegan, Republican, Democrat, we do not like our money to be dumped out onto the ground or in the waters, or we don't want unnecessary land waste. We don't want animals to die in vain. And this is what we're really paying for. And this is what we're allowing our taxes to be used to subsidize these industries to make sure they're still breathing and kicking. And so, yeah, that's, I mean, I could go on forever in that regard, but that's essentially what I'm trying to say, is that, you know, sales at all really affect the industry and kind of keep justifying that this is something that people want and need. And, you know, we don't realize how much it doesn't benefit anyone, no matter who you are.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you for sharing. All right, let's go with Christopher.
Hey, thank you. Yeah, I think that we pretty much covered like all of the pretty much all of the ways in which it impacts like human health, like, you know, dairy consumption altogether, and not just milk. But I just wanted to like really restate the fact that one of the main ways that it impacts human health collectively, not just for Black and brown people, not just for poor people, but like climate change. Honestly, like the fact that it is like not even under discussed, but almost just not discussed at all as part of like our strategy for mitigating the worst effects of climate change, is changing our eating patterns and our eating habits, is absolutely terrifying, and it's completely irresponsible. And like, you know, but of course, like so much of our like food consumption, and especially consumption of animal products, is tied up in identity. We cannot take our stranglehold off of the natural world and the other animals that live in it with us, not even to save our own lives. So it's not surprising to me that we don't discuss them. But like if we don't, and if we don't address this, and the reason why dairy is so particularly insidious is because the use of natural resources is so vast. The use of like land is so vast. The amounts of deforestation for cattle grazing is so overwhelmingly vast. It's like, you know, that like the consumption of other animal products really pales in comparison. And so like if nothing else, if absolutely nothing else, like, you know, just the elimination, not even the reduction, but just, it has to be said, the outright elimination of this is extraordinarily destructive practice that is largely, like, if not entirely, the product of colonization and imperialism, has got to be, like, it has to be abolished in order for us to, like, you know, in order for us to actually have a chance at survival on this planet. And like, you know, and yes, fossil fuels are still like the biggest driver, but like it's right up there in the top 3. We cannot ignore this any longer. And it's to our own peril. So when we're having discussions about human health and the perseverance of our lives on this planet, like it has to be completely eliminated.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing that. All right, let's go to Ev.
I think I wanted to touch on just how just globally the dairy industry worldwide has gone to severe lengths, to an extreme lengths, to gain land and gain kind of grain, whatever lands and whatever things that they need to make their industry more profitable in the different areas they're working, to the going to the lengths of directly harming and killing individuals, including workers that work in the industry, but also looking at indigenous communities that are being pushed out and killed in the Amazon, for example, in order to make room for cattle grazing. And as Laura mentioned before, in Yemen is another example. But there's too many examples where the industry is directly harming people for their own profit.
Right, yeah, I hear you. Do we have any other comments or additions before we move on to the last question? All right, Laura.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that, you know, the list of health problems that dairy is causing are kind of endless because, you know, if you look at like cancer, for example, it majorly turns on the genes that, you know, basically make you prone to getting cancer. If you look at diabetes, it plugs up the cells so that they can't receive insulin. I mean, it's just like endless. Like basically, you could look at like every major health problem. Another thing I would say is we have to look at things like bovine growth hormones, superbugs, which are like where they're making people antibiotic resistance because the cows are being pumped up full of so many drugs. And one of the major reasons why they're being pumped up with antibiotics is because of the risk of zoonotic diseases, right? So, you've got zoonotic diseases like, you've got like salmonella and you've got foot and mouth disease and you've got, you've got like so many different things, but then you've also got the zoonotic diseases like even COVID is a zoonotic disease that did not come from the dairy industry, but that did come, it appears, from animal slaughter and is spread in animal agriculture, when you have these enclosed spaces where you have animals that are forced to live on top of each other, they are standing in their own manure. We're talking a lot about land usage, which is horrifying in terms of how much this industry uses, but then actually factory farming was supposed to be the solution to land usage because it uses a lot less land. But then, of course, you've got the animals living in these horrific conditions that are also disease breeding factories because they are in closed spaces with all of these bodies together in filth, right? So, the list of health issues is just endless. And I forgot to mention this earlier, but one of the things also with the water pollution that's being caused by the dairy industry is miscarriages. Major issue with miscarriages being caused by people who live in those areas. So yeah, this is just like an endless subject, basically.
I hear you. Wow. Let's go to Kennedy.
I feel like,
sorry, I just wanted to mention, Yvette, you have such a cute cat. Okay, that's it.
And so we must know the cat's name, please. What is Kitty's name?
His name is Leroy.
Hi, Leroy. So cute. But I was just going to say that I think that mental health is such a really important topic that goes along with milk consumption. When I think about the students that are within schools who are basically being told your health does not matter to us, so we're not going to supply you with soy milks or almond milks or oat milks to fit your dietary diet. It's shameful. I can still remember being in high school and middle school and still not having those options for me. And if I'm someone who's trying to make an ethical or an environmental stance, I'm not able to do that. So I'm left to, as soon as I walk into those schools' doors, I'm kind of left to set aside my morals and my beliefs for 6 to 7 hours. So it really is a thing that needs to be changed. And so with bills like the Healthy Students Act, hopefully things like this will allow students to be able to continue their impact and continue their mission even within the school door. So mental health is truly an issue that I think can go along with things like consuming milk.
Definitely, I hear you. Did somebody else have something to add? Are we good? I think we are good. Okay, then let's move on to the last question. Oh my, we made it through. I'm so happy. Okay, here we go. Let's see it. All right, what can we do to work towards solutions that minimize the food system's human impact? I will put that in the chat. All right, Frankie, go ahead.
Well, I think one thing that's super important to start with is definitely education in schools and just to the general public about just how big the impact of the dairy industry is. And we can't continue promoting milk as something like healthy and no consequences, just drink your milk at school, it's good for you, with no background as to where it came from and who and what is impacted by where, like, the making of this milk. And I think teaching students what they're actually drinking is super important and how it impacts everyone.
Definitely. Yeah. All right, let's go to Christopher. You had your hand up?
That's right. Like solutions for minimizing the food impacts. excuse me, the food system's human impact. Wait, is that? Okay, yeah. No, I had to like it's like 2 o'clock in the morning where I'm at. I had to think about that question for a second. But like, yeah, like first things first, let's all be on a plant-based diet. If anybody's watching this and you're not already on a plant-based diet and you don't have any medical or like psychological or like emotional reason for not being so, do that now. Move in that direction immediately. Like I'm pretty sure that everybody on this like chat already is. But secondly, like diversify like ownership of the food system. Obviously, we can't stop Tyson and Purdue from like, owning the food system the way that they do, but we can also localize in our own communities and try to grow our own food insofar as we're able to. Obviously, that's not a possibility for everyone, but insofar as we're able to reclaim ownership of the food system in whatever small capacities that we can, like there's absolutely no reason why like I have to go to the grocery store to buy apples when like, like there once was a time when we could just have apple trees and people could just eat them. How do we get to a place where we are now buying bottles of water, plastic bottles of water, and like, and like fruits and vegetables when we have the capacity to actually grow them, but we've lost the ability to do so because of the massive industrialization of our food system and like, the consolidation of ownership. So yeah, reclaim that. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you for sharing. Let's go to Lauren.
Sorry, I don't think I realized I was next. Well, I think when we talk about the food system, for someone like me, that includes human and non-human animals, right? It's not just one or the other. And the sooner we start to acknowledge it and the sooner we start to talk that way, the more we build true solidarity, where we're able to work together to stop the exact same forces that are seeking to oppress and exploit one being as the same entity doing that to another. So I think that the sooner we can do that, the better we are. I think we also need to be honest about things. It's not easy for everybody to go vegan. It's a financial situation for many, many people. So we need to be honest that it's not easy to go vegan and acknowledge that up front, because we need to start talking to people about where they really are at, not where we're assuming they are based on our own privileges. So I think that we have to look at who they are, who their lived experiences are, but not in a fake way, right? I don't think white people should be going into Black and brown communities and talking about veganism. I really don't. I don't think it does any good for anybody. So I think first and foremost, that's the number one thing, is to acknowledge that you're not who they want to hear from. They want to hear from people who look like them, sound like them, and have similar lived experiences with them. I think that, we need to meet people where they're at. And what I mean by that is, for those of us who are Black and brown, we need to talk about this stuff in a real honest way. We need to talk about that they're trying to kill us and they don't care if they do. We need to talk about the legacy of colonization. We need to be upfront about it, right? But I'm not going to go in and I'm not going to talk about somebody else's culture. I'm going to speak from my own culture and my own basis of where I'm coming from. I'll talk about colonization of my ancestors before I start talking about somebody else's ancestors, because that is not going to serve the same purpose. Their mind is going to be shut, not opened. And when we're talking about people who are experiencing in their daily lives racism, discrimination, various forms of oppression, whether it be Black, brown, Indigenous, or LGBTQ, we have to keep people's lived experiences in our mind and how we talk about these things. So I think that we need to get away from a movement that thinks that we can change the food system and all it is telling people to stop eating animals. That's so short-sighted. And in my opinion, that's so 1980s when I got involved in the animal rights movement. We need to understand that things are more complicated. We need to know that when people are hearing us, they want to know, where's the credibility? So if you're saying, oh, it's easy to go vegan, and they're like, really? I know I am, but my Thea couldn't. She doesn't live in an area where they have access to healthy foods. It erodes our credibility. So I think we just need to be smarter in how we talk about these things and honest about how we talk about these things. And I think that that's the best way. And yet again, talking about the connections between various issues. But I don't mean lip service. Don't act like you care about farm workers if you really don't care about them, please, because you're not doing anybody a favor when you do that. talk about farm workers if you care about farm workers, and be consistent that you're not just talking about slaughterhouse workers and factory farm workers because you're trying to score vegan points. You better be prepared to say, I know my food doesn't come from a great place, but I'm doing what I can to advocate for those workers as well. So I think it just takes us a little bit more integrity on what it is that we're doing, what we're saying, how we're doing it, how we show ourselves, how we show up in the world, how we are to other people. Because the more we come across as proselytizing, intolerant people, the more people we scare away. And I say that not because I'm pointing fingers, it's because I can look in the mirror and I can see 17-year-old Lauren going vegan to see where I am right now. And so it's like, I'm trying to have you all learn from my mistakes and do your best and be true to who it is that you are. And the one thing nobody can ever take away from those of us who are vegan for the animals, that there's nothing wrong with being compassionate. There's nothing wrong with caring about non-human animals. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And when people try to take that away from us, that is our strength. And we go back to our heart and you say, gosh, someone's telling me not to be proud of caring about another being. That's on them. It's not on me at all. So there's my little soliloquy. I'm sorry, y'all. Bye. Thanks.
No, thank you so much. Thank you so much. All right, so we do need to start wrapping up to move on to the Q&A. So I will get final thoughts from, in this order, Ev, Yvette, and then Laura. So Ev, you can go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, as far as like ways to work towards minimizing the impacts of the dairy industry, I think an important thing to also look at is holding our government accountable for the pieces that they play in that. I know that the government plays a lot of, or plays a major role in how the dairy industry has so much power, but and there's a lot of ways that that manifests. There's, the government subsidizes those industries, which means taxpayers are paying money to help those industries out, whether they want to or not, which is a major problem, I think. But there's other issues too, like the USDA having conflicts of interest. It's supposed to be an organization looking out for our health, but like the USDA was responsible, it was behind campaigns like Got Milk, and also like to this day, the USDA partners with, or a sect of the USDA partners with corporations like Domino's, Pizza Hut, etc., to create, some of those products that you see that are like extra cheese with, cheese on top and a cheesy crust. Like the USDA, our health organization, is partnering with those corporations to sell us a product that is unhealthy and has a negative impact on so many people. And all of that plays a major role in the dairy industry's success. So I think it's important to hold those systems accountable and look at those systems and see how they're contributing.
All right, yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go to Yvette.
I'll try to be very quick. I know we're pressed for time. Luckily, half of what I just wanted to say was just said, but I did want to add systemic activism. Yes, these taxes, bailouts are happening, but they got there because of lobbying. These industries are influencing politicians, and we need to be doing the same. Vegan lobbying groups, Agriculture Fairness Alliance is one of them. It's in tandem to Liberation 360, which I'm a part of, and we need to widen our scope as well. When we come in as a fringe animal rights movement, just talking about, animal feelings, it doesn't land well. When we talk about the environment, believe it or not, it's, not everybody's interest, as it seems, as wild as that is. But when we learn how to build these bridges with all communities, because we don't have time to do this on our own, we really just don't, especially from the environmental aspect, we really need to build these bridges, and we need to do them very quickly. And so just some things that we can kind of reach out and grab other people. We can talk about how this makes no sense for our economy, how our money's being wasted. Job creation and these new sectors would be a big topic. Veg technology, Americans being the leaders of innovation. I mean, all these things will interest Republicans and other groups that we don't have on our side right now as we go into these, lobbying platforms. And we don't have to do it ourselves, but if we can afford to support lobbying groups, groups, or, we can even help lobby on a local or state level, get our voices heard. The same rhetoric, the same polished speeches we're giving outside on the sidewalk, we can do that in other spaces to get our voices heard and be more effective. And so, yes, just be mindful of that. I don't want to take up too much time.
Thank you so much. To top us off, Laura, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm going to try and be fast. So the first thing I wanted to respond to, really great points from everyone. I wanted to respond to what Lauren said about, white people should not be going in and lecturing people of color about going vegan, which I strongly agree with. However, white people can speak to other white people who consider themselves to be racial justice allies about the impact of their dietary habits on communities of color, impoverished communities, etc. So I think there is a very big role here for white people who want to actually impact on that level to speak to their own people who are the source of the problem here, of course, initially. So, and very much still today, I would say. So that's one thing I wanted to say. I also wanted to talk a little bit about what I've been doing with Plant the Land team and just this vegan food justice movement more generally, because I think that this is a really great way to, number one, meet a very critical need for communities that are food insecure, and to also build alliances of movements. So, of course, Plant the Land is in Gaza, and it is run by Gazans. And I co-founded it with a Gazan activist. He is not a vegan, although he randomly happens to be a vegetarian, but I am really the one who brought in the vegan connection. And one of the reasons I felt that would be important was because it was a great way to connect the vegan movement to the Palestine solidarity movement, to provide food justice, to educate people in the vegan movement about what's going on with Palestine, to make Palestinians feel supported by the vegan movement, and many, many other reasons. But I do think that there's a really big opportunity for movement building when you connect food justice to veganism in this way. Also, worker solidarity. Actually, there were worker strikes, for slaughterhouse workers when the pandemic broke out. And the vegan movement didn't get involved with that. And that would have been a great opportunity to say, hey, we see that this is victimizing you too. And we don't just care about the non-human animals, we care about you and your well-being. And we also see the connection between these different forms of oppression. And actually, the woman that I mentioned earlier, her name is Susannah Soto. She is the Mexican animal rights activist who used to work in the chicken slaughtering facility when she was a teenager. She's been very active in working on immigrants' rights and labor protection for the immigrants who are working in these facilities. And it's exactly what Lauren was saying. It's like they want to listen to her when she comes to speak about this industry and how it's exploiting them and non-human animals and everything else, because she worked in that industry. She's had similar life experiences. She is a Mexican immigrant herself. And, so she's really kind of working to build, again, that sort of an alliance. And she actually has pushed for a law that is on the books up for vote in California to ban the construction of new slaughterhouses and the expansion of existing slaughterhouses. So, there's really like a lot of fertile ground there to build movements for collective liberation, human and non-human. Even just the whole existence of borders, right? This whole construct of citizenship. This is something, yeah, I see time. Okay, I'm gonna get off. But I mean, this in and of itself, these are ways to keep people in subjugated positions. And the last thing I'm gonna say about that is that as long as they're is an animal exploitation industry. There will need to be an underclass of humans to do that labor because, of course, nobody who had other options is going to do it. So it's reliant on systemic racism, xenophobia, borders, prisons, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you so much, Laura, and thank you everyone for your contributions. So before we move on to our Q&A, I have a call to action on behalf of Operation Mind Over Milk. So some big news dropped this past week. On Wednesday, the House of Representatives will be reviewing, hold on a second, will be reviewing the Healthy Meals, Healthy Kids Act. This act includes two groundbreaking provisions that will, for the first time, provide resources to public schools to help them expand access to plant-based foods and cow's milk alternatives in their cafeterias. The dairy industry is already fighting these provisions, and they need to know who they're up against. So to support this act, you can submit personal testimonies about your experiences with school lunches, contact your representatives in support of these provisions, signed a petition, and more. We'll provide a link in the YouTube live stream chat where you can access all action items. This act is going to mark up on Wednesday, so don't delay. All right, now we'll get into the Q&A. To our audience on the live stream, please chime in with any questions you have for our awesome panel, and I'll read them aloud. All right, we've got our first question from Rowan. Do y'all have any good, AKA bad stories about how dairy has affected you or people you know? And anyone can go ahead.
Sure. I was supposed to raise my hand, wasn't I? Maybe I'm taking this in the wrong direction. When I used to eat dairy, it would instantly make me so mucus filled, like particularly my nose. And it was like, I could blow my nose 100 times in a row. It didn't matter. It was going to come and fill up again. And yeah, I've had a moment just sitting in front of a group of people, like trying to hold my dairy snot and then laughing really hard and just having it all gush out. And that was fun and memorable. So yeah. I'm sorry. I don't know if that's what you're asking about bad stories.
That is exactly, I think, the answer to the question. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else has something to share? Yes, Frankie.
I just want to add that I used to get really bad acne, but then I stopped eating dairy, and now I never get acne. So,
yeah. Dang, that's kind of crazy. I actually do have something myself. I used to I don't know, for some reason, you know, how they just like we were talking about, there aren't a lot of plant-based options. And I remember at my school in elementary school, I used to go home early from just having these really bad stomach aches during lunch every day. And I wouldn't even realize that it was because of the dairy, but I just be oh, I feel so sick. And I even throw up sometimes, but you know, there were no plant-based options for me to go off of. So it was just it's either this or I don't eat today. What? Anyway, but let's move on. Laura has something to say. Go ahead.
So yeah, the first thing I wanted to mention was just again, the asthma that I mentioned earlier. Actually, my mother used to be quite severe asthmatic. She even went into a coma once from asthma and had to be rushed to the hospital. And since you know, she's stopped for the most part eating dairy, she did say that her asthma has improved 90% as compared to what it was when she was eating dairy. So again, it really does cause a lot of mucus and congestion in that way. And the other and I will also say that I am asthmatic as well, but you know, I never had severe asthma, but way less even since going vegan. The other thing I wanted to mention about this is that I actually taught in China for a while, and dairy is starting to become a thing there. Although I am hearing, you know, especially since the pandemic, that maybe that's changed, but or is changing, because they're realizing that animal agriculture is causing a lot of problems environmentally and zoonotic diseases and everything. But people were eating dairy. My students were eating dairy. My colleagues would eat dairy, and then they would actually get sick. Like they would have a stomach cramp. We would talk about it, and they'd be like, yeah, I'm not feeling well. I ate some ice cream earlier. So it was like really, such a direct impact right away. And the interesting thing about that as well is that China is actually where a lot of the plant-based milks originated. So what irony that now they're having dairy foisted on them, because again, it's this Eurocentric idea that, you're supposed to eat dairy, when in actual fact, they've always had milk made from plants.
Great, thank you for sharing that. All right, let's go to Ev.
Yeah, my story is similar to Serena's. I didn't know that I was lactose normal for the longest time. I found out very recently. Since getting involved with veganism, I learned about all this stuff, and I was like, wait, maybe that's the problem. But yeah, I had all these issues for so long where like it was just so pervasive, because it was beyond just like literally drinking milk, but it was any foods that I happened to like cook with dairy and had those elements in it. So I would have all these like intense stomach aches, and I would feel sick, and it was like distracting. It was hard to get through a day. It wasn't like, something that major, but it was just like a lot of stomach cramping. Really just uncomfortable. I didn't feel energized after eating. I just felt weighed down, and like my body like wasn't really dealing with the food. But there were so many diverse categories that made me sick that it didn't even occur to me that it was dairy. And when I started realizing, I would restrict what I ate in a lot of ways. Like I thought that eggs made me sick. That's because when I made my scrambled eggs, I would put milk in them, which I don't eat eggs anymore. That's its own thing. But back then, but yeah, there's just like all these like lattes. I thought coffee made me sick. It was the milk and the lattes. But there were just like all these things that I kept myself from eating because I knew they made me sick, but I didn't understand the root of it. And so just because of that, it restricted my food world a lot more than it even needed to, just because I didn't know about being lactose normal or that it could have that impact on me.
Yeah, I hear that. Wow. Okay, well, does anybody have anything to add? Otherwise, we do need to move on to the next question. Give it a moment. Good. We're good. Okay. Thank you. All right. So the next question is from Menica. What is the role of school milk programs? Do public schools in the US still promote milk? And does the milk industry provide teachers with propaganda materials such as coloring pages or posters? Yes, Lauren.
They do. And in the state of California, they also will take baby cows. Don't know if this is done anywhere else in the country, but they take baby cows with them, which gets the oohs and ahs of the little kids. And they talk about dairy, and they give posters and give coloring pages. And then, of course, for the teachers, it's just kind of like a day where they don't have to teach. So it's a win-win for everybody but the non-human animals and, of course, the kids and the planet.
Yeah, I actually do remember that day in school. I don't know why. I never remembered what it was about. I just remembered like a cow coming to school, and I was like, what happened? But like, I don't know. Animals came to my school a lot, so it was fun. But anyway, Kennedy.
I would also answer yes to this question. There is definitely a level of propaganda that goes into the classrooms, even just like within the grocery stores as well. Like you see the happy cow, and even like with little toy games. I remember seeing like little grocery stores yet, and it had a happy cow on the milk, the play milk. But even back in classrooms, there was a certain time in history where there were political agendas to villainize Asian Americans and their soy and all of the food that they brought over to America. And similar to political cartoons, it was a political agenda to make Asian Americans villainized. And this created a really big division within America, of course. And it, of course, just continued to penalize those who were bringing over essentially healthier foods and eating healthier foods, so that they could be seen as othered. So that's just one way that the US has continued to, use their propaganda in a way to subjugate people of the global majority.
Yeah, I hear that. Wow. Okay, Isabel, go ahead.
I also had an epiphany about going to a farm in elementary school, and they wanted us to milk the cow and then drink the milk from the cow. And then when I got home, I got sick. I had like everything go wrong. I just had to endure the bus ride, and like, no, it was not fun.
Oh, that sounds terrible. I'm so sorry. Okay, does anybody have extra thoughts on this question, or should we move on to the next one? Keep it rolling. To you. Okay, I think we're moving on. Okay, Taryn asks, what do you think of white or white passing folks writing and talking about these issues and thereby getting credit? An example, writing books or research papers about these issues or working at nonprofits. Yes, Lauren.
Is everybody hoping I'd answer this? I will say that I think that it's about giving credit where credit is due, right? If these people are, if white people are writing things and all of this, and they're taking credit for it as if it's their own ideas, and as Sebastian and I know, and I'm sure many of other of you have experienced, people take our work and credit it as themselves, and it's a problem, especially when it erases the work of Black, Brown, Indigenous people. So I think it's a problem in the movement. But I would say that if who's going to reach out to white people is white people, right? Like Laura said earlier, right? Like they're going to listen to it. And I think that it's right or wrong, when it comes from us, we could say the same things, but it comes across as like, you complain about everything. You don't like my costume. You don't like me talking about your tamales, whatever it is, right? But if it comes from a white person saying it, then it has a little bit more influence than if we do. So I think that it's fine as long as people are giving credit where credit's due and giving knowledge, giving credit to where the knowledge is coming from. I think that when it comes to organizations, what I really would like to say is just, I wish that there were more Black and Brown led vegan organizations. I will leave it there.
Right, thank you. Isabel, go ahead.
I think that's really annoying that a lot of white people go around saying that something is theirs or they invented it. Like something that's going on right now is spa water, and it's literally agua fresca or jamaica or fresco de tamarindo. I'm like, like it's so irritating that credit isn't being given to the people that came up with that stuff.
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next question. If we have time at the end, we can circle back to your final thoughts on that particular question. So Matthew asks if the efforts of animal advocates and availability of plant-based options seem to have made an impact, and how could those efforts be more effective? If we don't have any responses, we can move on to the next question, but I'd love to hear from you guys on this. All right, yeah, Laura. Oh, sorry, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. All right. So I was going to say, yeah, it's a concern because honestly, even though there have been more and more plant-based options available, there has been also increases in animal consumption. So clearly, I mean, yes, we need plant-based food availability, but clearly that's not enough. So I think we do need to, speak more to the ethical components of this issue and really the animal rights components of this issue, because that does get lost in this conversation a lot of times. And I feel like, and I say this of myself as well, like I need to always go back to that because a lot of times people will feel like if you talk about anything other than that, they will look for solutions around, the other issues, right? Oh, well, we can have stricter labor laws or environmental laws or, this, that, or the other thing. And they'll kind of like try to dodge around the central issue of the subjugation of non-human animals. So as long as they can do that, they're not maybe going to make that connection that this industry in particular, as horrifying as all industries under capitalism are, this industry is inherently unethical, even in a non-capitalist system, right? So I do think that that is something that we need to ground this in. And but also, I mean, we have to end capitalism because as long as we have capitalism, it's going to be this sort of like system of exploitation where everything and everyone is going to be looked at as a resource for exploitation for profit. So, it's not just a matter of making plant-based foods available, although obviously that is very important.
Definitely. All right, let's go to Christopher.
Hey, I try to keep my answers brief because I want to be mindful of time, but people are asking really great questions and there are not really easy black and white answers that you can just give like a really short soundbite to. I'm going to try my best to be as concise as possible. I really wish that Yvette would try to tackle this question a little bit as well, because I think that a lot of her work with Liberation 360 and with the Agricultural Fairness Alliance actually has a lot to do with this. Do I think that largely the efforts of animal advocates have been effective and the availability of plant-based products have moved the needle? Maybe it's the lateness of the hour that makes me cynical, but I'm going to say no. And I say that because the weight of evidence, the weight of evidence, the research that we have from the best economists that we have available to us, and the and the sociologists that look at these things indicates that although we saw some modest drops in animal product consumption over the past couple of years due to supply chain issues, the pandemic, and a variety of other factors, and we have seen an increase in the consumption of plant-based alternatives. We've had plant-based alternatives the whole goddamn time. Oops, I'm sorry. And frankly, it hasn't changed squat. I've got burgers coming out of every hole in my body. We've got milks that are being made out of pencil lead at this point. We're at peak plant-based alternative right now, and all that we've meaningfully done is enrich the pockets of the people who have created these products, and we are still creating a massive dearth of land resources and water resources because of animal consumption. So no, I don't think that we've really meaningfully changed much in the past 2 or 3 decades. And I think that that has a lot to do in part with the fact that we are, and this goes into a lot of Laura and what Laura was saying too, a lot of the organizations and change makers in our spaces have a very white Western Eurocentric lens on how to change these issues. And I don't see that being resolved unless and until we allow more voices being heard, or a bigger plurality of voices being heard from people from Black and brown communities and indigenous communities, and particularly people in the global South who are being most affected by changes to the food system. So that's my thoughts right now.
Thank you for that. Yeah. Okay, so in the interest of time, I'm going to need to cut things short. So we're going to close off with Yvette. Go ahead.
All right, I raised my hand because Sebastian told me to. Keeping it very short, yes, I agree. No, we have not made much of an impact, although, you know, plentiful options. These options, plant-based foods, need to be subsidized. But furthermore, and we really need to hone in on that as well and help small farmers transition as well, you know, to plant-based or plant-based adjacent, just regenerative farming. But another really crucial piece, and in ways that we could be more effective, is if we understood how to communicate what the food system looks like right now. Because I tell you, there's this big, scary thing, this unknown in a plant-based food system that has created a lot of conspiracy theories, unfortunately. But there's this big unknown that actually has those who are opposed to what we're trying to do actually using the playbook from the meat and dairy industries. They're really summarizing everything unbeknownst to them and saying, I'm afraid this is going to happen if plant-based food takes over. You know, this, like, why would you want this corporatized monoculture, these mega corporations all in our food? And it's mind-blowing, the things that you know, people will tell me, and I'm like, this is happening right now. You know, we are against it just as much as you are. So when we don't understand what's happening in our food supply chain, we don't understand food policy, we don't understand who's in control of the food right now, then we're liable to cling to it as tradition, as safety, as thinking, if you take away my burger, all I know is that I'm not going to have a burger and the world's going to fall apart. And so really, and to summarize the best I can, you know, try and get involved. You can join me on Liberation 360. I'm trying to create a space for the education around the food system, animal agriculture, and otherwise, so that we understand how to approach this and get more people on board. Again, I sound like a broken record, but building bridges is really the keystone to what we're going to need right now. We're just too small to operate alone.
I hear you. Thank you so much for sharing, and thank you all. Okay, I need to make a statement for the.
Hey, Serena, really quick,
Yeah,
thank
go ahead.
you for doing such a fantastic job and moderating all of this. So many different people and personalities. You've done an exceptional job, and you look great.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, well, that's very sweet of you. Thank you. So I wanted to say, we haven't been able to get the links to post in YouTube, so please check out the Raven Corps' Instagram for details on how to get involved. And lastly, let me just look through. Okay, so I wanted to say, you know, thank you all so much for participating. Casey will send out a post evaluation right after this roundtable for our panelists. And for anyone who wants to get involved, apply to Zoomers to Boomers. The link is in our bio on the Raven Corps' Instagram. And lastly, tune in to next month's roundtable on the topic of how dairy farming impacts the environment. So I believe Yvette even brought some things up about that. So this was so fun. Thank you so much. And that will be all for me.